Picture a general standing on a battlefield he has already lost. His men are scattered. His supply lines are cut. The enemy outnumbers him 3-1, and every advisor in his tent is telling him to run, telling him that retreat now is the only reasonable choice, that a smart leader cuts losses and lives to fight another day. He does not run. He stands there, calm, unreadable, his face betraying nothing of the collapse unfolding around him. And something strange happens. The enemy hesitates. They start asking questions. Who is this man who does not flinch? What does he know that we do not? Is this composure, or is it a trap? That single moment of doubt, planted in the enemy's mind by nothing more than his stillness, buys him the time he needs to regroup. That hesitation is the entire game. Because value is never created by chasing. Value is never created by convincing, pleading, or performing louder than everyone else in the room. Value is created by becoming the kind of presence that makes other people afraid to lose you. A presence so calm and so complete that its absence feels like a loss nobody quite knows how to explain. Not because you performed for them. Not because you begged, adjusted, shrank, apologized for taking up space, or explained yourself into being needed, but because you built something inside yourself so solid, so quietly complete, that your absence would leave a hole nobody else could fill. A specific textured absence that no replacement, however impressive, could quite paper over. This is not about revenge. This is not about proving anyone wrong. And it is not a strategy for manipulating people into staying. This is about becoming someone who no longer needs the approval of the room to know their own worth, and who, paradoxically, precisely because they stopped chasing it, becomes the only person the room actually wants. We are going to build that person today, piece by piece, using tools that have survived 2,000 years of scrutiny, because they simply work. And I want you to subscribe before we go any further, because what I am about to show you is not motivational noise, not a collection of quotes stitched together for a moment of inspiration that fades by tomorrow morning. It is a system built from philosophy that has outlasted empires. And systems only work if you come back to sharpen them, again and again, until they stop being information you heard once and start being the way you actually move through the world. 2,000 years ago, a group of philosophers built a framework for exactly this kind of quiet, devastating strength. They called it Stoicism, and they did not build it in comfortable rooms, surrounded by comfort and applause. They built it in exile, in prison, on the eve of execution, in the middle of plagues and civil wars, in circumstances that would break most people within a matter of weeks. Marcus Aurelius wrote his private notes to himself while commanding an empire under siege, grieving children he had buried, and managing wars on multiple fronts, with no expectation that a single word of it would ever be read by anyone else. Epictetus taught freedom of mind after living decades as a slave, after having his leg broken by a master, and still arrived at the conclusion that no external circumstance, however brutal, could touch the part of him that mattered most. Seneca counseled emperors, accumulated wealth and influence, and then watched it all threatened daily, knowing every single day that his death sentence could arrive by nightfall on nothing more than an emperor's changing mood, and still wrote with a steadiness that reads, even now, like a man who had already made peace with everything. These were not men theorizing about hardship from a comfortable distance, offering advice they had never tested in their own lives. They built their philosophy as a weapon, forged specifically for people who had every reason to break and chose, deliberately, again and again, not to. But philosophy alone is not enough, and this is where most self-improvement content falls short, giving you quotes without ever asking you why you needed to hear them in the first place. Because the parts of us that sabotage our value, that make us small, needy, easy to overlook, easy to discard, don't live in our conscious mind, where we could just reason our way out of them. They live in the shadows, buried under layers of habit and old survival machinery. Carl Jung spent his life studying that shadow, the parts of ourselves we refuse to look at. The fear, the neediness, and the desperate hunger to be chosen, approved of, kept. And he warned us of something brutal, something that should stop you cold if you actually let it land. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate, when really, it was simply the unexamined parts of you quietly steering every decision you thought was freely made. So this is not just Stoicism. This is Stoicism with a blade turned inward first, philosophy paired with the psychological honesty required to actually use it. 7 ways to become so valuable, so complete, and so undeniably present that the people who once overlooked you will spend years wondering what they let walk away. Let's begin. Way number 1. Master your reactions before anyone else masters your attention. In 1944, in a Nazi concentration camp, a psychiatrist named Viktor Frankl noticed something remarkable. The prisoners who survived, psychologically intact, were not the strongest or the most defiant. They were the ones who found a sliver of space between what happened to them and how they chose to respond. Everything around them had been stripped away. Their names, their possessions, their families, their futures. And yet Frankl kept observing the same quiet phenomenon. Some prisoners, even in that horror, still chose how they carried themselves through it. He later wrote that everything can be taken from a person but one thing, the last of the human freedoms, the ability to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances. Marcus Aurelius understood this centuries earlier, ruling an empire, burying his own children, and fighting wars he never wanted, all while writing private notes to himself that nobody was ever meant to read. He wrote that we suffer more in imagination than in reality, and that the impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. He was not writing theory. He was writing survival instructions for himself, at night, exhausted. Because he understood something most people never learn. The gap between the event and your reaction to the event is the only territory you will ever truly own. Here is your shadow, and I want you to actually sit with this instead of nodding past it. You react instantly to slights because some younger part of you learned that being ignored meant being unsafe. You snap, you over-explain, and you chase clarity from people who owe you none of it, because your nervous system still believes that silence equals abandonment. Maybe it was a parent who withdrew love as punishment. Maybe it was a childhood where being forgotten felt like being erased. Whatever the origin, that reaction is not really about the person in front of you today. It is an old alarm system, still wired to a threat that no longer exists, going off in the middle of your adult life and convincing you it is urgent. The tactical application is simple, and it is brutal in its simplicity. The next time someone tests you, insults you, goes cold on you, or tries to provoke a reaction, you do not respond in the moment. You count to 10 breaths. Not because it looks composed, but because in those 10 breaths, you are literally rewiring which part of your brain gets to drive, moving control away from the reactive limbic system and back into the deliberate, patient prefrontal cortex. Reaction is cheap. Anyone can produce it instantly, for free, with no thought behind it. Composure is expensive. It costs discipline. It costs practice. And most people simply cannot afford it. And people always notice who can. Way number 2. Stop negotiating your worth in rooms that have already decided against you. There is a well-documented pattern in psychology called the sunk cost fallacy, and nowhere does it do more damage than in our relationships and our careers. We stay in situations long after the evidence tells us to leave, because we cannot stand the idea that our investment was wasted. So we keep explaining ourselves, keep proving ourselves, keep auditioning for people who already cast us as replaceable long ago, in a decision they made quietly, without ever telling us, while we kept showing up for a role that no longer existed. Epictetus drew a hard line here, and he drew it from a place most modern teachers never earned the right to speak from. He had been a slave. He had been beaten. He understood, more intimately than almost anyone in history, the difference between what can be taken from a person and what cannot. He said some things are within our power and some things are not. Our judgments, our desires, our aversions, in a word, whatever is of our own doing, these are within our power. Everything else, other people's opinions of us, their moods, their decisions, and their timing, is not. To spend your energy trying to control what other people think of you is to hand them the steering wheel of your own life, and then wonder why you keep arriving somewhere you never chose to go. Here is the confrontation. You keep performing for people who have already made their decision about you, because deep down, some part of you still believes that if you just try a little harder, explain a little clearer, or apologize a little sooner, you can force someone to see your value. That is not devotion. That is control dressed up as love, and it never works. Because you cannot argue someone into respecting you, and every attempt to do so only confirms, in their mind, that your value is negotiable. The tactical move is this. Identify one room in your life right now, one relationship, one job, or one group chat where you have been over-explaining yourself for the last 30 days. Today, stop, not dramatically, not with a speech announcing your new boundaries. Just stop supplying the extra context, the extra apology, the extra proof. Say what is true once and let it stand on its own merits. Watch what happens to the room's energy when you remove your explanations from it. Rooms recalibrate fast when the performance stops, because the performance was the only thing keeping the old dynamic alive. Way number 3. Build a self so complete that scarcity becomes your presence. Nietzsche wrote about a kind of person he called the sovereign individual, someone who has become their own master, who no longer needs the herd's permission to know who they are, and who has, in his words, the right to make promises because their identity does not shift with the weather of other people's opinions. He said that he who has a why to live can bear almost anyhow. Most people never build a why. They borrow one from whoever is standing closest. A job title, a relationship status, or a group of friends whose approval becomes the invisible currency of their entire self-worth. And then, they wonder why they feel hollow the instant those external structures shift. Why a single breakup or a single missed promotion can feel like the collapse of their entire identity. Here is your shadow. You confuse being needed with being valued, and those are not the same thing, though they feel almost identical from the inside. Being needed means someone requires your function, your usefulness, your availability. Being valued means someone recognizes your essence and would still want you in the room, even if you stopped performing your function tomorrow. Chasing the first one keeps you exhausted, because functions can always be replaced, outsourced, automated, or simply grown tired of. Building the second one requires something much harder. It requires you to develop an identity that exists independently of anyone's applause, an identity that does not evaporate the moment the audience leaves. The daily tactic here is what I call the closed-door practice. Once a day, spend 15 minutes on something that develops you, a skill, a craft, a piece of knowledge, or a physical discipline, and tell absolutely no one about it. No post, no mention, no subtle bragging disguised as vulnerability. No waiting for the validation that turns private growth into public performance. Just build. In private, in silence, for no audience at all. Over time, this creates a version of you that has depth nobody outside can see the edges of. A version of you that is not fully knowable from the outside. And depth like that is magnetic precisely because it is not on display. Because people can sense there is more to you than what you have shown them. And that sense of hidden depth is one of the rarest, most valuable qualities a person can carry into any room. Way number 4. Let your absence do what your presence never could. There is an old story about the Spartans, who were famous not for their speeches, but for what they did not say. When Philip II of Macedon sent a message to Sparta, threatening that if he entered their land he would raze it to the ground, and that every city in his path had fallen, the Spartan reply was a single word. If, no paragraph of justification, no list of counter-arguments, just enough restraint to make an empire pause and reconsider. Seneca wrote something similar centuries later, from a very different kind of exile, watching his own influence rise and fall, depending on the whims of an emperor he could not control. He said that as long as you live, keep learning how to live. But he also warned that nothing is so certain as that the vices of leisure are shaken off by hard work, and that idle talk, constant explaining, and constant justifying are the vices of the anxious mind, the noise a person makes when they do not trust that their presence alone is enough. Silence, real silence, deliberate and unafraid, is the vice killer. Here is the confrontation. You feel silence because silence terrifies you. If you stop talking, stop justifying, and stop chasing the last word in every disagreement, some part of you is convinced the other person will simply forget you exist, will move on, and will fill the space you left with someone louder. So you keep the noise going, believing it protects the connection, when in reality, it is slowly draining your value with every extra sentence. Because scarcity, real scarcity, is created by restraint, not by volume. And the person who never stops talking is telling the room, without meaning to, that they are afraid of being forgotten. The application is this. In your next difficult conversation, say what needs to be said once, clearly, without hedging it into mush, and then stop. Do not repeat it in 5 different ways to make sure it landed. Do not soften it into apology after apology. Let the silence sit, even when it feels unbearable. Let the other person fill it. You will find that the person who can tolerate silence almost always holds more power in the room than the person who cannot, because silence, held with steadiness, reads as strength, and silence, held with panic, reads as weakness. And the only difference between the two is practice. This is a good place to pause. I want you to notice something about the last 4 minutes. You have been sitting still, listening, maybe nodding along, maybe feeling a little exposed. That is not an accident, and it is not weakness either. That is what it feels like when philosophy actually reaches the part of you that needed it. Most content is designed to keep you scrolling. This is designed to keep you thinking, so take one slow breath right now. Unclench your jaw. Drop your shoulders an inch, and let's keep building. Because the next 3 ways are the ones that actually change how people treat you. Way number 5. Do the work nobody applauds. Because that work is what makes you irreplaceable. Psychologists who study elite performers, from Olympic athletes to concert musicians to chess grandmasters, keep finding the same pattern. The people who reach mastery are not the most talented in the room at the start. They are the ones who kept showing up for the invisible repetitions, the 10,000 small corrections, the ones nobody was filming, the ones that never made it into a highlight reel because there was nothing dramatic to film, just the same movement, refined slightly, over and over, for years. Anders Ericsson, who spent his career researching expertise, called this deliberate practice, and the defining feature of it is that it is almost never enjoyable in the moment, is often uncomfortable and repetitive, and is almost never witnessed by anyone else, which is exactly why most people quietly abandon it. Marcus Aurelius put it plainly, writing to himself in the dark hours before dawn, before the empire's business began. He said, "Waste no more time arguing about what a good man should be. Be one. Not perform one. Not announce one. Not build a following around the idea of one. Be one in the hours nobody is watching, and the version of your life that never gets an audience, because that version is the only one that is actually true." Here is your shadow. You want the results of discipline without the invisibility of discipline. You want to be seen as valuable, but you resist doing the parts of the work that never get seen at all, because some part of you needs proof in real time that the effort is worth it and needs an audience to make the discomfort feel justified. That need for constant validation is exactly what keeps you dependent on other people's attention instead of your own standards, and a person dependent on attention can never truly become scarce, because they are always, in some quiet corner of their mind, performing for someone. The tactical application. Pick one skill, one discipline, one repair project in your life right now, something that matters to you specifically, not to your image, and commit to 40 minutes of unwitnessed work on it, 5 days this week, with your phone in another room. No posting the process. No telling anyone your plan, not even the people closest to you. Let the compounding happen in the dark, quietly, without commentary. Value built in silence cannot be talked out of you later, because nobody can argue with results they watched you actually earn, and nobody can take credit for growth they never even knew was happening. Way number 6. Integrate your shadow instead of exporting it onto everyone around you. Carl Jung believed that everything we refuse to face in ourselves gets projected outward onto the people closest to us, dressed up as their fault, their character flaw, or their betrayal, when in reality it is our own disowned material wearing their face. The jealousy we will not admit to becomes suspicion of our partner. The insecurity we will not name becomes irritation at our coworkers. A low-grade hostility we cannot fully explain. The fear of being ordinary becomes resentment toward anyone who succeeds near us. A resentment we quietly justify with a dozen small criticisms of their character, instead of ever naming the envy underneath it. Jung called this the shadow, and he said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. When really it was never fate at all. It was simply the part of you that you refused to look at, running the show from behind a curtain." Here is where this gets uncomfortable, so stay with me instead of letting your mind slide past it. Every time you have felt disrespected by someone and immediately blamed their character instead of asking what old wound just got triggered in you, you were exporting your shadow. Every time you have watched someone else get chosen, promoted, loved, or celebrated, and felt a flash of bitterness instead of curiosity, that was your shadow speaking louder than your discipline. And every time you let that bitterness leak out sideways, in a snide comment, a withheld congratulations, or a cold shoulder, you handed your power directly to the wound instead of to your values. The Stoics would tell you to examine your judgments, to ask whether your reaction is proportional to reality or inflated by fear. Jung would tell you to examine the parts of yourself hiding behind those judgments, the exiled, unexamined material generating the fear in the first place. Combined, the practice becomes this. Each night, write down one moment from the day where you had a strong emotional reaction to someone else's behavior, even a small one, especially a small one. Then ask yourself one uncomfortable question. What does this reaction say about an unmet need in me, not about them? Do this consistently, night after night, and you will watch your relationships change, quietly and permanently, because you will stop punishing people for wounds they did not create, and you will start recognizing your own reflection before it has the chance to run your day. Way number 7. Detach your outcome from your effort and become impossible to control. There is a famous archery teaching from ancient philosophy, echoed across Stoic and Eastern traditions alike, that the archer's job is to draw the bow with full skill and full attention, to align the body, steady the breath, and aim with total precision, and then release the arrow without attachment to where it lands. The moment the arrow leaves the string, the outcome belongs to the wind, the distance, and the target's own movement, not to the archer. The archer's excellence was already complete the instant the string was released, regardless of what happened next. Epictetus said it directly. Make the best use of what is in your power, and take the rest as it happens. Seneca, facing his own death sentence with total composure, awaiting word from an emperor who could end his life on a whim, wrote that a great mind never fears the future, because it does not need the future to be a certain way in order to remain steady. It has already made peace with every version of how things might unfold. Here is the final and hardest shadow to face, the one underneath all the others. You have been trying to control outcomes, other people's feelings, other people's decisions to stay or go, and other people's timelines and choices, because deep down you do not fully trust that you will be okay if it does not go your way. That lack of trust in yourself, not the other person's behavior, is the actual source of your neediness. It is why you check your phone 40 times waiting for a reply. It is why you rehearse conversations that have not happened yet. It is why losing something you never even had can feel like losing a part of your identity. The tactical application, and this is the one that changes everything once it becomes real to you, instead of just a nice sentence you agree with. Before any high-stakes moment, a conversation, a decision, a relationship crossroads, or a negotiation, say this to yourself once, quietly, and mean it. I will bring my full effort, and I will release my attachment to the result. Then act, fully, without holding back out of fear, and let the outcome fall where it falls. People can feel the difference instantly, on some level below language, between someone who needs a particular outcome and someone who has already made peace with any outcome. And it is always the second person who becomes irresistible to keep around, because their steadiness does not depend on your decision. Here is what nobody tells you about becoming valuable. It was never about becoming louder, more impressive, more available, more accommodating, or more willing to bend yourself into whatever shape a room seemed to want. It was about becoming so anchored in your own worth that other people's opinions became information instead of verdicts, something to consider rather than something to be sentenced by. That is not arrogance, and it is not coldness either. That is what the Stoics called living according to nature, aligning your actions with reason and virtue rather than with the shifting approval of an audience, and what Jung called individuation, the lifelong process of becoming the fullest, most integrated version of the self you were always meant to build, shadow and all, rather than the fragmented, performing version most people settle for. None of the 7 ways we covered today are quick fixes, and if anyone tells you that becoming this kind of person happens in a week, they are selling you something rather than teaching you something. This is slow work. It is the kind of work that does not announce itself with dramatic before and after moments, but instead reveals itself gradually, in the way people start speaking to you differently, in the way rooms start feeling different when you walk into them, and in the quiet realization, months from now, that you no longer feel the old panic when someone pulls away. The people who once overlooked you will not regret losing you because you punished them into it, because you engineered some clever plan to make them jealous. They will regret it, because one day, in some ordinary, unremarkable moment, They will look for that steady, unshakable presence they had grown used to leaning on, and realize it walked away quietly, built its own life elsewhere, and never came back looking for permission to matter. If this reached something in you, subscribe, because I build one of these every single week, and the next one goes even deeper than this one did. Tell me in the comments which of these 7 hit hardest, because I read every single one, and it genuinely shapes what we build next, which struggles we address, and which parts of this philosophy deserve more time. Stay disciplined, stay unreadable, and I will see you in the next one.